Okay, what game?
Finally, I'd like to say something briefly about IPOST, which stands for Iowa Physician Orders for Scope of Treatment. And IPOST is Iowa's version of something called the PULSE Project, Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. IPOST is not an advance directive. It is an actual medical order. In an advance directive, people express their wishes and desires for kinds of treatments they do or do not want. IPOST is an actual medical order about those treatments, so it's stronger than an advance directive. Now, the wishes expressed in advance directives are taken into account in executing an IPOST. But you do need to keep in mind the difference between the two. Anyone who is 18 years old or older in Iowa can execute an advance directive, a living will, durable power of attorney for health care. However, by Iowa law, those who can execute an IPOST form is restricted. To be eligible to execute an IPOST, you either have to be terminally ill or have a chronic critical medical condition or fall into the category of frail elderly. So people who are perfectly healthy can sign a living will or durable power of attorney for health care. You have to be in one of these specific health conditions to be eligible to execute an IPOST. Now, if you would see the pamphlet, page 5, I think this was unfortunately reproduced separately as it been handed out.
Yes.
Okay, section 2.
You didn't get section 2 out.
Yeah, we got section 2.
Yeah, we got it.
Section 2. I've reproduced here what is on the IPOST form. IPOST allows you to make decisions regarding resuscitation, several types of medical interventions, whether you want comfort measures only, or a limited range of additional medical interventions or full treatment. Then finally, you can make decisions about medically assisted nutrition and hydration. Now, an IPOST form is said to be portable across medical settings. It's good whether in your nursing home or in a hospital or if you're being transported by EMTs. For example, with do not resuscitate orders. We've had one set of do not resuscitate orders if you're in a hospital, another set of out of hospital do not resuscitate orders. You had to have two sets essentially if you wanted to be covered. With the IPOST form, it's good across the board. Now, yes?
Is that true in having worked in this before? Is that true for the IPOST for DNR? If you call EMS because they're in respiratory distress,
Okay, if you've got the IPOST form, they will honor it.
they will honor. Okay.
Yes, they will honor it. Okay. Now, an important thing to notice is that IPOST is not just for foregoing treatment. You can use the IPOST form also to elect to have certain treatments. So, for example, for resuscitation, attempt resuscitation, do not. Okay, you can choose either of those. For medical interventions, you could limit yourself to comfort measures only, or you could elect to have full treatment. Same with medically assisted nutrition and hydration. You could forego it, or you could elect to have it. Now, a criticism that has been made about the PULSE project is that it's skewed in favor of foregoing treatments. But again, if you look carefully at this form, it does allow you to elect treatments. And the idea is to select those treatments that are appropriate for a particular person at a particular time, but you may also select not to have certain treatments because they would not be appropriate. Now, an I-post form is not written in indelible ink. It is meant to be reviewed periodically and revised as the condition of the patient changes. So if you look at the actual I-post form, there are spaces on there indicating dates of review. Okay, I don't have this reproduced here. Or again, instructions are given about when it is appropriate to review an I-post form. If the person's health status changes, or when a person is transferred from the nursing home to the hospital, that's an occasion on which you want to review the I-post to make sure it still reflects the current medical condition of the patient. Now, there is no national I-post form. There was a template that was developed nationally, but this type of form is instituted state by state, and there are variations among the states. Now, you may have heard, for example, that the bishops of Wisconsin and Iowa issued statements discouraging the use of the POLST form in their states. But again, the forms they were looking at are different from the I-post form that we have. And the Medical Moral Commission of the Dubuque Archdiocese has done a detailed comparison of I-post with the kind of POLST forms that we looked at in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And we have found that we have addressed the concerns that were expressed. For example,
I was just going to say, you mentioned the Iowa bishops issued a statement. I don't think you meant Iowa.
Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Minnesota and Wisconsin. Thank you for the correction. Okay. For example, in the Wisconsin form, I believe, the person for whom the I-post was being executed didn't have to sign it, or his proxy didn't have to sign it. In Iowa, it is mandatory that the person executing the I-post or his or her proxy sign the form. Or again, a concern was expressed that somebody might execute this years in advance before they'd ever be in a certain medical condition. Not true in Iowa, because again, by law, it is limited to 3 types of medical conditions. Okay? Terminal illness, chronic critical medical condition, or frail elderly. So maybe it's the case that no one in this room is even eligible to execute an I-post. You can't execute it if you're healthy. Okay. So again, the point I want to make is that you need to look at the specific stipulations of I-post, and again, recognize that we have addressed concerns that have been expressed by bishops in other states. Okay. Now, a question has been raised about the relationship between the POLST form, which I-post is one version, and the physician-assisted suicide movement. Now, the POLST project did originate in the state of Oregon in 1991, and physician-assisted suicide was legalized in Oregon in 1994. However, the two developed completely independently of each other by different groups. And the POLST project does not provide for physician-assisted suicide. And the National POLST Office is about to release a statement indicating what I have just said. So POLST is completely different from the physician-assisted suicide movement. You don't have to worry about that. And in fact, the I-post legislation, the POLST project in Iowa, has it in our law that this is not a means of euthanasia. There is an explicit anti-euthanasia clause in the law establishing I-post in Iowa. Also, there is a conscience clause for healthcare providers in our Iowa I-post law. So that say if someone would come to a Catholic healthcare facility with an I-post executed in a way that they felt was not consistent with Catholic teaching, legally the Catholic healthcare facility would not have to honor that I-post. They just send the person elsewhere. Okay? So we do have those protections in place. Now, with an advanced directive, you could just download the forms through the internet and fill them out. Okay, you could do that. Not true of iPost. You could download a sample form from the Iowa Department of Public Health, but you couldn't actually execute that. In Iowa, you have to sit down with a healthcare professional or a trained facilitator to walk you through the iPost form. And to be valid, the iPost form has to be on a certain color and weight of paper, and then it's placed in a plastic sleeve in your medical record. They're very particular about this. So again, you can't just download it and execute, okay? Now, I've given you a copy of a pamphlet that was put together by the Archdiocesan Medical Moral Commission in Dubuque, Completing iPost Guidance from the Catholic Moral Tradition. And again, especially in section 2, we set out the principles you need to use in making the choices available on the iPost form. And they're the principles we've been talking about this morning. So say if you're making a decision about resuscitation, you look at the benefits and burdens of resuscitation. If you're deciding whether you want comfort care only, or full treatment, or some intermediate, again, you will look at the benefits and burdens of those treatments. And again, for the special case of medically assisted nutrition and hydration, we outline what choices you should make. That you should elect it on the iPost form unless it's not going to work or would be excessively burdensome. So we are suggesting that people take this pamphlet with them when they go to execute an iPost form to have the guidance from the Catholic moral tradition. Okay? So that's just a little, yes?
So if you have this verbal power of attorney, does somebody have to fill out an iPost form? Is that a mandatory thing?
No. No.
So you can just say, use my verbal power of attorney.
Okay. iPost is available, but it's not mandatory to use. But why might it be valuable even if you have a durable power of attorney for health care? Well, say in a DPA, you might give as one of your instructions, if I'm imminently dying, I don't want resuscitation. Now, a do not resuscitate order is a physician-written order. Okay? Just expressing that wish in a DPA form is not a medical order. So if you go to a hospital and you've got the DPA form with you saying that, they still have to run around and find the doctor who's going to write the DNR order. Okay? Whereas with the iPost form, you've got the medical order already. Or again, it can happen with people in a nursing home. Something happens at 2 a.m. and they're debating about whether the person should be hospitalized, taken to the hospital or not. Again, if you've got the iPost form, you already have the medical order in place about what to do in those kinds of situations about hospitalization. That makes sense. Okay? Okay, finally, I'd like to end by saying something briefly about the physician-assisted suicide movement. Now, this past January, a bill was introduced in the Iowa legislature to legalize physician-assisted suicide in the state of Iowa. It didn't get anywhere at that time, but we're not expecting it just to go away. Now, what do you mean by physician-assisted suicide? This allows a physician to prescribe medication to a patient at the patient's request if the patient is terminally ill, and it's a lethal dose of a medication which the patient takes at home to cause his or her own death. So it is a form of suicide. It's also called physician aid in dying, or the terminology that's now being used for physician-assisted suicide legislation is death with dignity. And that's a real euphemism. I mean, who can be against dying with dignity? Okay. So again, when you hear that phraseology, you need to be real careful to recognize that it's just a euphemism for physician-assisted suicide. Now, physician-assisted suicide is currently allowed in Oregon, Washington, Montana, and Vermont. And Tom Chapman just told me that the legislature in Iowa just passed...
California.
I'm sorry, California just passed legislation, and it's awaiting the governor's decision. About a year ago, you may have seen a video made by Brittany Maynard, okay, that she was a young woman in her 20s who had a very aggressive form of brain cancer. And she and her husband moved to Oregon so she could take advantage of their physician-assisted suicide law. So her case really brought to national attention the whole issue of physician-assisted suicide. Now, I would like to show you two short videos on this topic. The first video was made in Canada, and it presents a really good overview of arguments for and against practicing physician-assisted suicide. We began an end-of-life project. And on the one hand, we do want to actively oppose physician-assisted suicide, but the other side of that coin is that we are going to be emphasizing good end-of-life care and trying to provide resources to parishes about end-of-life issues, involve our Catholic healthcare facilities especially in offering palliative care services, making those services known. Again, when you're dealing with people who have loved ones who are suffering tremendously, my personal view is that the theoretical arguments against assisted suicide are not really going to be persuasive to them unless we can also show them that there's an alternative way of caring for people well at the end of life. So that I think this component of trying to promote good end-of-life care is a very, very important part of the project of opposing assisted suicide. And you will be hearing more about this project from the Iowa Catholic Conference. I think eventually there will be some sort of official kickoff announcement. We're getting it together right now. Okay, any other questions you would like to ask that haven't been covered this morning? Yes?
Yes, I have one, and I'm not sure, I hope I don't offend anybody by saying this, but in our healthcare system and the direction it seems to be going, the government seems to be making more decisions as to what we will and what we won't have available. Are the bishops, I mean, we can't answer that, but maybe you guys can, considering we have directives and legally, possibly they're signed, whatever. When it comes down to burdensome and chemotherapy and things, if the government decides that chemo isn't going to be an option if you're over 70 years old, or you're not going to be entitled to this or to that, is all of this for naught?
Okay, well, I don't know, Tom, if
Well,
you have any response to that.
I would just say one thing is that a good example is right now the government is approving rules for Medicare to reimburse physicians for having end-of-life care discussions. And there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself, I mean, for getting reimbursed for that. However, the bishops have put forth some principles, you know, for when the government is going to put this rule into place. And one of those principles is, you know, remember there's already laws against assisted suicide. So you can't really be reimbursing for discussions that talk about assisted suicide. And it goes on from there. So the bishops are very much aware of that piece of it.
Okay, and I'm not so concerned with the suicide as I am our general care.
And that's part of that. That's exactly, that's part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Insurance companies seem to play a big part.
Right.
Palliative care for us.
I'm sorry,
Palliative care.
define it? Okay, I'm sorry I didn't do that. Okay, palliative care refers to measures to provide comfort for people, to relieve distressful symptoms. Now, these measures are not necessarily going to cure the disease, but they are going to make it more bearable.
So is there palliative care even while you're administering chemo or antibiotics, or does that circumvent that?
No, say, well, comfort care should always be available.
Yes.
But what happens is that there may be a switch from a mode of trying to cure somebody to providing palliative care, recognizing that cure is not possible. Okay. And the notion of palliative care especially comes up in those end-of-life contexts, where you recognize somebody's going to eventually die. But we're going to do everything possible to make that dying process comfortable for the person, to preserve their quality of life as much as possible. So there may be a switch in modality from emphasizing trying to cure to trying to make people comfortable.
But with a terminally ill patient that is on palliative care, you just naturally assume that they're not getting any chemo or radiation or any medication.
Well, okay, not necessarily.
Not
necessarily. Yes.
Maybe if I might address that, right after Easter, my father was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And we're currently treating him monthly with rounds of chemotherapy to keep him comfortable. Because when he was diagnosed, he was having a lot of difficulty breathing. He was in a lot of pain, very uncomfortable. And the chemo is, and the doctors have been very clear, it's not going to cure it, but it has made him more comfortable. He's eating better, he feels better, you know.
So the chemo is actually palliative.
It's considered, yes, it's considered palliative, and the doctor has said, because I asked him a few months ago, well, how many rounds do we do? And he said, well, there is no set. As long as it's making him comfortable and he's not having a lot of side effects from it, which at this time he's not, then we just continue it so that he's comfortable and he can enjoy. You know.
So again, the same thing can be true of antibiotics. They might cure pneumonia, but above that, they make the person more comfortable. Yes.
So in that case that you're describing, your father is still on palliative care. If he goes to the point of hospice care, would they stop the chemo? Or would the chemo be able to continue because it's comfort?
Okay. That's where it becomes tricky then, because we have discussed hospice, and we have met with 2 different hospice companies, if you will. The one, no, they don't support continuing palliative, you know, therefore, you know, more end of life. The other one was, well, we can take it to our director, and many times, if it's palliative, then yes, they will continue to support it to a certain degree. So, but at that point, you know, he's at the nursing home, so we're not using any hospice care at this time. But it's there, you know, for us in the time is needed. So yeah, it's kind of tricky. There's no, you know, real yes or no, and it kind of depends on the company and I guess what they're able to do, provide.
Now, Hospice of Dubuque is starting a new program called Journey Care. It's for people who can benefit from palliative care services, but who don't qualify for it when they're Medicare, they're not terminally ill. So they are expanding the range of palliative care services they're making available, because hospice is so very good at doing that.
Are they still eligible for hospice?
Okay, they're not on hospice as such. They're on what's called Journey Care, although the hospice agency is providing the palliative care.
So this is like a supplementary.
Yes, yes. Okay, anything else? Okay, well, I will stay around for lunch in case you'd like to ask me anything personally. I hope that this program has been personally profitable to this morning.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to take your pen out because I'm going to give you an email I want you to respond to, an email address. And for our evaluation today, instead of a traditional form, what I'd like you to do is to just send Joe an email and tell her what you thought of the day. So Joe's email address is
Chafin, and it's C-A-F-F-I-N H-A-F like in Frank, E-N,
Thank you.
at dmdiocese, diocese.org.
So next few days, just drop a note and tell her what you thought.